Thought there would be no better way than to kick off the Christ is risen, then behold our God. I can't imagine what it was like to have that blessed day where, let's be honest, probably Friday night and Saturday night were rather sleepless nights for our early church family, our church fathers. I asked in the sunrise service, how many of us have ever had a restless night's sleep, right? Have you ever had a restless night's sleep? I mean, really think about what Friday must have been like, how difficult it must have been for those early believers to know that Jesus Christ was in a grave and all of our hope, in a sense, all of their hope was gone. And here we are, Resurrection Sunday, getting all of that fulfillment, all of that anticipation, all of that excitement for waiting and hearing and knowing that Jesus Christ indeed was in a grave and our hope was perhaps gone. And this morning, when we talk about the resurrection, this morning, our major word is evidence. What evidence do we have to know of the resurrection and to believe of the resurrection of Jesus Christ? You know, for a lot of us, you heard your scripture reading this morning, and I'm going to read it again to you. It says, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received," and this is the Apostle Paul speaking, "that Christ died for our sins, and in accordance with scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas," who is Peter, "then to the 12, then he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep." And why that phrase is so important is if this was a hoax, if this was a lie, if this wasn't true, you had more than 500 witnesses that could have stood up and said, wait a second, this isn't true, this is a lie. Plus, where Jesus Christ was crucified is also where Jesus Christ was buried, in the city of Jerusalem. And there was lots and lots and lots of opposition to be able to say that indeed Christ was alive. So what happened this week, well, in the last 2 weeks, is I went on an adventure beginning to think about what does the world record about Christ? See, if Christ was as profound a world figure as we profess that he is, and the Bible seems to proclaim that he is, it would only make sense that somewhere in the world history, in the annals of history, something about Jesus Christ would be recorded. But you need to realize 4 things. Realize, one, that there are actually very few manuscripts from Jesus Christ's time. Apart from the Bible, there wasn't lots and lots of things being written. Not only that, historians generally record very little about religious figures, especially in the Roman Empire. The Roman empires, and I don't know if you knew this or not, the emperors in Rome were God. So the emperors had no time for other religions. They wanted you to bow down to them. On top of that, think about this. Jesus Christ's actual active ministry was approximately only 3 years. In the scope of history, in the scope of the greatness of Rome, that's a blip on the map. And also realize that a majority of Jesus Christ's ministry happened in a very remote region of the Empire of Rome. So to be able to think, would there be any historical evidence, would there be any worldly historians that record anything about Christ, in and of itself would be a borderline miracle if there would be something recorded in history. And yet we find right off the bat in 52 AD, a man named Thallus recorded this. "On the whole world there pressed a most fearful darkness, and the rocks were rent by an earthquake, and many places in Judea and other districts were thrown down." What was that darkness? What do you think? When? This is after Christ was crucified, right? And the world turned dark, and the graves were open, and the earthquakes came. Here we have a Roman historian named Thallus that wrote about this event. On top of this, there is a historian named Phlegon. Here you see his name right at the opening bit. Now, unfortunately, we don't have his direct manuscripts. We only have people that quote him. His manuscripts have been destroyed. But Phlegon records that in the time of Tiberius Caesar at full moon, there was a full eclipse of the sun from the 6th hour to the 9th hour, which is exactly what the Word of God tells us happened, and the world recorded it as true. On top of that, we learn again from Philegon about the person of Jesus Christ. We learn that world historians saw that in the 13th or 14th book in the Chronicles of Philegon, not only does he ascribe to Jesus a knowledge of future events, but he also testified that the results corresponded to his predictions. And what Origen is saying is in this Roman historian book, he records the predictions and the prophecies that Jesus Christ made, and he records how those prophecies came to be so. I don't know if any of this blows your mind. I don't know if any of this, and you're sitting there and perhaps you're in college, maybe you were in school, and shouldn't any of us wonder, why do we not hear any of this in world history? A figure that has totally transformed our world. Jesus Christ has transformed our culture. Jesus Christ has transformed me as a person. Jesus Christ has transformed more than any of us can think or imagine, and yet none of us will go to school and hear any of the historical evidence of the reality of Jesus Christ. Here we've stated so far 3 instances of worldly historians recording the facts of Jesus Christ. This is written by a gentleman named Josephus. He was a Jewish historian that was not in favor of Jesus Christ, and we learn this about Christ. Now around this time lived Jesus, a wise man, for he was a worker of amazing deeds and was a teacher of people who gladly accepted the truth. He won over both many Jews and many Greeks. Pilate, when he heard of him, accused by the leading men among us, speaking of the Jews, condemned him to the cross, but those who had loved first did not cease doing so. To this day, the tribe of Christians named after him has not disappeared. See, we see in this documentation that indeed Jesus Christ was crucified at the hands of Pontius Pilate. It's a verifiable, accurate, recorded event. In fact, we know, even through the Jews, that Jesus Christ's empty tomb is a verified, recorded event. How do we know this? Because when the men came to told the leaders of the Jewish party that the grave was empty, they said, "Tell a lie. Tell them that someone came and took his body and that it wasn't really arisen or resurrected." We see later about the lives of Christians and what the world thought of Christianity and what the world thought of this Jesus Christ. This is Tacitus, who is probably one of the most respected, most revered Roman historians. He verifies that these Christians lived lives that looked like Christ, but also where they got their name. Consequently, to get rid of the report, and just so it's clear what this report is, many believe that Nero himself caught Rome on fire in order to make room for the palace that he wanted to build. He was probably verifiably crazy. This is the same Nero that, for sport, because he hated Christians, dipped Christians in tar, lit them alive, and raced his chariots by them by night. This is the report about Nero. Consequently, to get rid of that report, he blamed the Christians. Nero fastened the guilt and afflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, or Christ, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hand of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate, and they are a most mischievous superstition. We've seen more than 4 world historians record the life and the supernatural works of Jesus Christ. And yet, we hear nothing of it. In fact, most TV shows that are out right now try to debunk this whole life of Jesus Christ. But we have more than reason to believe that indeed Jesus lived, that Jesus died, and that Jesus rose again. Here we have a recording from the Jewish teachings. Now, remember, many of these kind of poke fun at Christianity. They poke fun at Jesus Christ, but I want you to see that even in their poking of fun, look at what they reveal actually happened. It was taught on the day before the Passover, they hanged Jesus. A herald went before him for 40 days proclaiming, "He will be stoned because he practiced magic and enticed Israel to go astray. Let anyone who knows anything in his favor come forward and plead for him." But nothing was found in his favor, and they hanged him on the day before Passover. Now, some may look at this and say, "Oh man, this is not good. They're calling it magic." Well, if you don't believe in the supernatural power of Jesus Christ, what are you going to call the miracles that Jesus Christ did? Magic. And see, they realized that he made lame men walk. They realized indisputable evidence that he had caused Lazarus to raise from the dead. And instead of believing in their Messiah, instead of believing in a man that lived a perfect, holy, and blameless life for them, what do they call it? They call it magic. You know, we live in a day right now that much of the world doesn't want to believe in the truth of Jesus Christ. Ultimately, is it because they don't want to believe because of lack of evidence? No, there's plenty of evidence. There's plenty of Roman historians that you could go back through and read their books of history. The bottom line is, for the world, why they don't want to follow Jesus Christ is because they don't want to stop living a life that's solely about themselves. And each and every one of us here today struggle with a very similar battle. We struggle living a life that doesn't fulfill our needs and our wants and our desires. We struggle to live a life that's not about us and that's all about Jesus Christ. And yet, the glorious thing about being here this morning is we have people all over the congregation that have lives that reflect the power, that reflect the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We see again that the life that Jesus Christ lived, Jesus, while alive, was of no assistance to himself, but that he arose after death and exhibited the marks of his punishment and showed his hands that had been pierced by nails. Origen wrote this in an argument against Celsius, written as recorded history, written as recorded fact. This morning, many of us are facing battles. Many of us are facing struggles. This morning, you're faced with a decision. In fact, as I was studying about the evidence of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, I came across a lawyer who has the Guinness Book of World Records for the most acquittals of murderers in the Guinness World Book. He got acquitted 254 murderers in a row. And this lawyer went about his business to try to seek and look for the evidence of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and upon his own study, upon his own investigation, his statement was that the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ leaves no room for doubt. How much do we as Christians, as we celebrate here this morning, how much of your heart as you woke up this morning was absolutely convinced? So convinced that if someone would come to you, threaten your life, threaten your livelihood, threaten who you are, how many of you woke up this morning so fully convinced that Jesus is alive, determined in your heart that no matter what happened today, you would proclaim it, you would shout it, and you would live it? Jesus is alive. See, this whole deal with Christianity, what we have to fight desperately so hard every day is you need to realize that each and every one of us are tempted every morning to wake up and to say, maybe I can do just a little bit today. Maybe I can be good enough today. Maybe I can work hard enough today. Maybe God won't see this today. Maybe God won't hear me today. And this morning what I'm saying is that even through the records of history, there is proof of the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Would you believe that as I studied and I studied and I studied, and this is just a portion of what I'm able to share with you this morning, that I was able to find recorded in history that Jesus Christ was born supposedly in the world's eyes to a virgin. They even record her name as Mary and that he was born to a carpenter. The world tries to make up all sorts of excuses. In the records of history, we see recorded that it is identified that Jesus Christ healed lame people and caused them to walk. There is the inexplicable miracle of Jesus Christ raising Lazarus from the dead, and the world tries to cast this into magic and superstition, but nonetheless they record it. They record that Jesus Christ was tried at a trial in front of Pontius Pilate and killed for you and I. They record it. The world records that the grave of Jesus Christ was empty, but they lie about it. And we as Christians sit here this morning and we're all tempted to say, is it true? And to me, one of the greatest evidences is not necessarily just the fact that it's recorded in history. It's not the fact that the world says that Jesus lived. It's the fact that throughout history, people have continually, faithfully lived, changed lives for Jesus Christ. Our lives as Christians, we have the privilege to be the evidence of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I want you to think about this quote about Christians in the first century church. I want you to think for 1 second, does what I'm hearing reflect what I'm living? The way that these early Christians passionately pursued, passionately lived, zealously preached, fervently loved, does it reflect the life that I call Christian living? This is recorded, remember, from a world's perspective on these people that they ignorantly called Christian. The Christians, you know, worship a man to this day, the distinguished personage who introduced their novel rights and was crucified on that account. You see, these misguided creatures, speaking of Christians, start with the general conviction that they are immortal for all time, which explains the contempt of death and the voluntary self-devotion which are so common among them. And then it was impressed on them by their original lawgiver, speaking of Jesus Christ, that they are all brothers. From the moment they are converted and deny the gods of Greece and worship the crucified sage and live after his laws, all this they take quite on faith. And with the result that they despise all worldly goods alike, regarding them merely as common property. I don't know if anyone's sitting there wondering what I'm wondering, but if I asked the world to record the history of my life, to record without me opening my mouth what in the world they thought of Aaron Benner, what in the world they thought of people who came to Richfield Life Ministries Church, would they write that we're a bunch of idiotic people that think they're going to live forever? You think they would? Would the places we go and the actions we take and the lives we live, would they reflect that whatever happens on this earth is nothing compared to eternity? And would they say that our grip on this world is so loose that our property is common property? That they wouldn't hear us walk around like the seagulls on Nemo that go, mine, mine, mine? And would they see us live lives that say, yours, yours, yours? This account of how Christians lived in the first century lets me know that these people, there's no way they'd back down from saying Jesus Christ rose from the dead. There is numerous accounts about Jesus Christ's disciples, and not just his 12, but those who followed him, being asked to renounce, being asked to recant their statement that they saw Jesus Christ alive. And you know what? One of the most interesting facts that I discovered this week, there is not one record of an early martyr denouncing Jesus Christ's resurrection. Not one. Think about the profoundness of that statement. Men and women, boys and girls, being asked to save their life, simply say, he didn't rise again, you didn't see him. That's all you have to say. Just say that he's not real, and you will live. And there is not one recorded instance that I could find of a first century believer being willing to denounce the resurrection of Jesus Christ. As you look at these apostles' lives, is there anyone other than me that after Jesus Christ's death and his resurrection, if you did not know the book of Acts, is there anyone other than me that would seriously ponder how in the world is the church going to make it on these 11 guys? Think about what Peter did a few hours before Christ was crucified. He denied him 3 times. All of them but one ran away. We see them arguing while Jesus is alive. Who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom? Who can sit at your right hand? And Jesus Christ says to them, what is that for you to worry about? And all of a sudden, when this resurrection thing comes upon them and they see Jesus Christ living after death, all of a sudden, these men, these women, their lives are radically turned upside down and transformed. And I know for many of us here this morning, many of us are far better at thinking about what you're not than what Christ has already done. And this morning, I want us to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. If the 12 disciples, barring the one that was replaced, lives could be totally transformed, taken from being a denouncer to a professor, taken from being a runner to a saver, if God's resurrection, Jesus Christ's resurrection, can change those men so much, I ask us as a church, what can Christ's resurrection do in us? Have you thought about it all lately? What evidence of Jesus Christ is there in your life? What evidence of this living Savior exists in your life? Now, I realize many of us here this morning want to be on the humble side, and we want to, oh man, I don't know, Aaron. But I'm serious. This is a time of rejoicing and saying Jesus is alive. Remember that. We're sitting here this morning professing not of our own power, not of our own strength, not of our own goodness. We are here professing this morning that Jesus is alive, and he is so alive that he has changed a people like us. That he has changed our hearts from being grumpy to joyful. That he has changed our hearts from being unloving to loving. And my challenge this morning, it's a one-fold challenge. Live lives that reflect the evidence of a risen Savior. Live lives that reflect the radical transformation that has taken place in each and every one of our hearts to show the world that Jesus is alive. That he's not just alive in the history books, he's not just alive in the Bible, but that Jesus Christ is alive in us. That's why we're here this morning. At least, that's why I'm here this morning. I'm here because I have no other explanation for what has happened to me apart from Jesus Christ living in me. I have no other way to explain how my anxiousness and my worry and my greed and my lust and my anger and my hatred have been overcome by love, have overcome by joy, have been overcome by contentment. Than to be able to say to you this morning, Jesus is alive in me. And you know the good news is, he's not just alive in me. I've asked many people throughout the church this morning to come up and to stand with me as evidence of the resurrection. Would you make your way up with me? You're going to see them hold signs that speak of the evidence of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Come up on stage. The signs are sitting right there. As you see them coming up on stage, what I want you to realize is none of us standing up here this morning are standing here because we think we're that good. In fact, the only reason that any of us are standing up here this morning is because we are fully convinced that our lives are the evidence of a risen Savior. That because Jesus Christ has conquered sin and death, he conquered the grave, he conquered the adversary, that we do not live lives that are to be pitied, we live lives that are to be envied. That when the world sees us in peaceless, hopeless, helpless situations, that the world will look at our lives and say, there's something different about them. And we as a church know that what's different about us is not that they live a better life than us. What's different is Christ's alive in them. My prayer this morning is that we will leave this place. Come on up, Paige. You don't have to stand down there. You spread out. I want to look at this. Church, I don't know about you, but he's alive. These boards are testimonies of people who have been changed by Jesus Christ, not because they're spectacular, not because, ooh, I forgot this one's all by itself. I'll hold that. Saintly, okay? Now, trust me, there's not one part of me that wanted that sign. But you know what I realize is it's because of the power of Christ that we're celebrating this Easter that makes all these signs possible. And this morning, if you're here and you're saying, Aaron, I'm beat up, I'm downtrodden, I'm having a rough day, I want you to know you have a testimony just like this, if you trust and believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. In each and every person that's here that believes in Jesus Christ, there is a testimony of a living God in you. Yours may not be up on here. Yours may say something else. I don't know what it may say. But what I do know is the Word of God promises me that if we are children of God and we believe in a resurrected Savior, our lives are resurrected. Death has no victory. Sin will not overcome because Christ has won. And this is why we're here this morning, to be a testimony of the evidence of Jesus Christ. This morning, I'm going to ask each and every one of you to stand with us. Stand with us, realizing that in your heart, would you stand, is the evidence of Christ in you. And I want you to think about, for 1 second, as we prepare to close in prayer, as we prepare to watch a closing video, I want you to think for 1 second, what would I write on this board? What would I write on my board to speak of the evidence of Christ?